The agreement was simple, a sham marriage, but fate and love changed all their plans. The autumn wind swept through Boston's financial district, carrying with it the scent of coffee and ambition. Camille Lawrence stood at her office window on the 32nd floor, her amber-brown eyes fixed on the city sprawling before her. Her curly dark hair was pulled into an elegant twist, and her burgundy blazer cut a sharp silhouette against the morning light. Below her Louboutin heels lay a stack of financial reports that could determine the fate of St. Clair's Home for Children, the orphanage that had given her both a childhood and a purpose. "The numbers don't lie, Miss Lawrence," echoed the morning's conversation with her financial advisor. "Without substantial backing, St. Clair's won't make it past the quarter." She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, allowing herself a moment of vulnerability that no one else would ever witness. The orphanage needed more than just money. It needed stability, proof of reliable leadership, and in the eyes of Boston's most conservative investors, that meant a specific kind of image, one that her single, career-focused status didn't quite fulfill. Her office phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. "Your 10 a.m. is here," her assistant announced. "Send them in," Camille responded, quickly straightening her posture and adjusting her blazer. No one would see her crack. Not today. Not ever. The door opened to reveal Robert Sterling, one of Boston's most influential venture capitalists. His silver hair and traditional Brooks Brothers suit spoke of old money and even older values. "Miss Lawrence," he greeted, his handshake firm but his smile calculating, "I've reviewed your proposal for St. Clair's." "And," Camille gestured for him to take a seat, maintaining the polished composure she'd perfected over years of boardroom battles. "The numbers are solid, but—" Sterling paused, studying her with practiced scrutiny. "Our investors are concerned about stability. St. Clair's needs more than just financial backing. It needs leadership they can trust. Someone settled, grounded." Camille's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She knew exactly what he wasn't saying. Single women in their 30s weren't exactly what conservative investors considered stable leadership material. "My track record speaks for itself, Mr. Sterling," she countered, sliding across a folder containing her achievements. "I've turned 3 failing companies into profitable ventures in the last 5 years alone." "Impressive," he nodded, barely glancing at the documents. "But this is different. This is about children, about family values. Our investors need to see someone who embodies those values." The implication hung heavy in the air. Camille forced a smile, even as her fingers pressed into her leather chair's armrest. "I appreciate your candor, Mr. Sterling. I'll take your feedback under advisement." Miles away, in the depths of the New England Aquarium's research facility, Jace Donovan was fighting his own battle. His blue eyes were fixed on a spreadsheet that refused to yield good news. His usually neat, light brown hair disheveled from running his fingers through it in frustration. "They can't be serious," he muttered, adjusting his glasses as he reread the email from the Morrison Foundation. His research grant proposal had been rejected. Again, Dr. Miranda Chen, his research partner, leaned against his desk. "Let me guess, they went with Richardson's project instead." "Worse?" Jace scoffed, turning his monitor so she could see. "They said my research is groundbreaking, but they have concerns about long-term commitment to the project, whatever that means." Miranda's expression shifted from confusion to understanding. "Ah," the old unstable lifestyle argument. "I'm a marine biologist, not a circus performer," Jace protested, standing up to pace his cramped office. The walls were covered with underwater photographs he'd taken himself, vibrant coral reefs now threatened by rising ocean temperatures. "What does my personal life have to do with saving marine ecosystems?" "Welcome to the world of old money science funding," Miranda sighed. "They want researchers who fit their image, settled, traditional, preferably with a family. It gives them confidence you won't abandon the project halfway through." Jace stopped at the largest photograph, a sea turtle swimming through a coral garden. He'd spent 3 years tracking changes in this particular reef, documenting its slow decline. Without proper funding, all that work would be meaningless. "So what? I need to get married to save the ocean." The words came out as a joke, but they landed with unexpected weight. Miranda raised an eyebrow. "You said it, not me. But you have to admit, your married to science routine isn't exactly winning over the conservative funding boards." Before Jace could respond, his phone buzzed with a text from his father. "Dinner tonight. Non-negotiable. The usual place." Jace suppressed a groan. Dinner with Richard Donovan, prominent New York attorney and perpetual disappointment in his son's career choices, was the last thing he needed today. But maybe his father's connections could help. The thought alone made his stomach turn. As the day wound down, Camille found herself in her favorite hidden spot, a small coffee shop tucked away in a historic brownstone, far from the financial district's glass and steel. Here she could let her guard down slightly, trading boardroom strategy for the comfort of a worn leather armchair and a cup of black coffee. Her notebook lay open on her lap, filled with precise handwriting detailing every possible avenue to save St. Clair's. The orphanage wasn't just another business venture, it was home to 23 children who had nowhere else to go, just like she had been, once upon a time. Her phone lit up with a message from Ava Carter, her best friend. Emergency drinks required. Scandal brewing at the Herald. Your place or mine? Camille smiled despite herself. A night of Ava's investigative journalist stories might be exactly what she needed. Her friend had an uncanny ability to find solutions in the most unexpected places. Meanwhile, Jace sat across from his father at an overpriced steakhouse, trying not to fidget with his tie. He'd changed into a proper suit for the occasion, but he still felt like an imposter in his father's world. Another rejection, Richard Donovan stated, rather than asked, cutting into his ribeye with surgical precision. Perhaps now you'll consider a more practical career path. My research is practical, Jace defended, his voice level despite his rising frustration. So climate change isn't going to wait for conservative investors to modernize their worldview. No, but your mortgage will, his father countered. I have connections at several prominent law firms. Environmental law. If you insist on staying in that field, it's time to grow up, son. Jace took a long sip of water, wishing it was something stronger. I am grown up, Dad. I'm just not grown up in the way you wanted. A grown man would have stability, a family, a future that makes sense. Richard's words cut with practiced efficiency. Instead, you're chasing fish and turning down every suitable woman I introduce you to. I'm not chasing fish, I'm trying to save entire ecosystems, Jace corrected, but he knew it was futile. His father had never understood, had never even tried to understand. As both Camille and Jace ended their days, neither could have guessed that fate was about to offer them an unexpected solution to their problems. Sometimes, the most improbable arrangements turn out to be exactly what we need, even if we don't know it yet. That night, as Boston's lights twinkled against the darkening sky, two souls lay awake, wrestling with the weight of expectations and the price of dreams. Tomorrow would bring them together in a way neither could have anticipated, setting in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything they thought they knew about love, success, and what it means to truly belong. Camille Lawrence never believed in fate, but sitting in Ava's cozy apartment that evening, surrounded by case files and half-empty wine glasses, she was about to have her skepticism challenged. Her best friend, investigative journalist extraordinaire, was sprawled on the vintage couch, her laptop balanced precariously on her knees. "You're not going to believe this," Ava announced, her eyes sparkling with the excitement of a fresh lead. "Remember that marine conservation story I've been working on, the one about corrupt funding practices?" Camille nodded absently, her mind still on Sterling's thinly veiled ultimatum. The good girl perfume she'd applied that morning had faded, much like her confidence in finding a solution for St. Clair's. Well, turns out there's this brilliant marine biologist who keeps getting rejected for grants, despite having groundbreaking research. Ava sat up straighter, her reporter instincts firing. And get this, the rejection letters all hint at the same thing: lifestyle concerns. Let me guess. Camille swirled her wine. Single, career-focused, doesn't fit their traditional mold. Exactly. Ava's grin widened. Dr. Jace Donovan, Harvard graduate, published in top journals, but apparently being unmarried makes him too unstable for their precious funding. Camille froze mid-sip. Wait, Donovan? As in Richard Donovan's son. The very same. Apparently Daddy Dearest is some hotshot lawyer in New York who's not too thrilled with Junior's career choices. Ava leaned forward, her voice dropping conspiratorially. Sound familiar? The wheels in Camille's mind began turning. How much funding are we talking about? Millions. The Morrison Foundation alone controls grants worth. Ava's voice trailed off as she noticed Camille's expression. Oh no. I know that look. That's your I have a crazy idea look. Before Camille could respond, her phone buzzed. Another email from Sterling. Final review meeting next week. Bring comprehensive stability plan. The crazy idea crystallized. What if? Camille stood, pacing Ava's living room with renewed energy. What if two problems could solve each other? Camille Lawrence, whatever you're thinking, stop thinking it right now. But Camille was already reaching for her laptop. Where did you say this Dr. Donovan works? The next morning found Jace in his natural habitat, not the sterile confines of his office, but the massive ocean tank at the New England Aquarium. He was suspended in the water, performing his weekly check on Myrtle, their elderly green sea turtle. The cool water always helped clear his mind, washing away the lingering frustration from dinner with his father. Through his diving mask, he watched as Myrtle gracefully glided past him, her movements unburdened by the expectations of others. If only human life could be so simple. A movement at the viewing window caught his attention. Usually, at this early hour, the aquarium was empty, except for staff. But there, perfectly framed by the massive window, stood a woman in a burgundy power suit, studying him with an intensity that made him pause. 20 minutes later, freshly showered and changed into his standard work attire of a light blue button-down and khakis, Jace found the mysterious woman waiting in his office. Miranda hovered nearby, trying and failing to look busy at her desk. "Dr. Donovan," the woman rose, extending her hand. "I'm Camille Lawrence. I have a proposition for you." Up close, she was even more striking, all controlled energy and sharp edges, like a carefully cut diamond. Her handshake was firm, confident, but her eyes held something more complex than their assured surface suggested. "Miss Lawrence," he gestured for her to sit, ignoring Miranda's not-so-subtle eavesdropping. "How can I help you?" "Actually," Camille crossed her legs, her Louboutins catching the fluorescent light, "I believe we might be able to help each other." She laid out her situation with business-like efficiency, the orphanage's need for funding, the investors' antiquated expectations, her deadline. Each word was precisely chosen, like she was presenting a quarterly report rather than proposing what Jace quickly realized was absolute madness. "Marriage." He almost choked on his coffee. "You can't be serious." "Perfectly serious." Camille pulled out a folder, an actual contract, he realized with disbelief. "A mutually beneficial arrangement. You need to present a stable image to secure your research funding. I need the same for St. Clair's. It's simple mathematics." "Simple mathematics?" Jace stood, running a hand through his hair. "This marriage isn't a mathematical equation, Miss Lawrence." "No," she agreed, her composure unwavering. "It's a social construct that, in this case, could save both our careers and, more importantly, help children and ocean conservation. 1 year, Dr. Donovan. That's all I'm asking." Jace studied her, trying to find the catch. "And after the year, an amicable divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. We both get what we need, and life goes on." She spoke with such certainty, as if she'd already mapped out every possible scenario. "This is insane," he muttered, but found himself picking up the contract anyway. The terms were surprisingly thorough: shared appearances at key events, coordinated social media presence, even a clause about maintaining professional distance. "Possibly," Camille conceded, and for a moment, her mask slipped just slightly. "But sometimes insane is all we have left." A knock at the door made them both jump. Miranda entered, trying to hide her obvious curiosity. "Jace, the Morrison Foundation just called. They want to move up the final presentation to next week." The same day as Sterling's final review meeting, Jace realized, catching Camille's eye, the universe, it seemed, had a twisted sense of humor. "I don't expect an answer right now," Camille stood, smoothing her already perfect suit, "but I do need one by tomorrow. Here's my card." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Dr. Donovan, I've read your research. What you're doing matters. It would be a shame to let outdated social expectations stand in the way of saving our oceans." After she left, Miranda practically burst with questions. Who was that? What did she want? "Why do you look like you've seen a ghost?" Jace sat heavily in his chair, still holding Camille's business card. I think I just got proposed to." That evening, as the sun set over Boston Harbor, two people stood at different windows, watching the same sky fade to darkness. Camille, in her pristine corner office, adding another pros and cons list to her notebook. Jace, in his small apartment overlooking the water, reading and rereading a contract that promised to either solve all his problems or create entirely new ones. His phone buzzed with another text from his father. "Dinner this weekend. Bringing the Blackwell's daughter no excuses. Camille's email pinged with a reminder from Sterling. Time running out. Need concrete stability plan. Sometimes, the most rational decision is the one that seems completely irrational. Sometimes, the perfect solution comes wrapped in the last package you'd ever expect to open. As midnight approached, Jace found himself reaching for his phone, Camille's card still sitting on his desk. The numbers glowed in the darkness as he typed, "About your proposition. Can we meet tomorrow morning? I have some conditions." Across the city, Camille's phone lit up with his message. For the first time that day, she allowed herself a small smile. Phase 1, complete. Little did either of them know. Agreeing to the arrangement would be the easy part. Living it, maintaining the facade while fighting the unexpected feelings that would begin to surface, that would be the real challenge. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, they were just two people making a rational decision in an irrational world, each believing they could keep their hearts safely out of the equation. The Boston Public Garden was coming alive with early morning joggers when Camille arrived, her heels clicking purposefully along the path. She'd chosen this location carefully, public enough to be proper, private enough for discretion. The autumn air carried a crisp bite, and fallen leaves crunched beneath her feet as she approached the agreed-upon meeting spot. Jace was already there, leaning against the railing of the bridge, watching the swan boats being prepared for the day. He'd traded his usual casual wear for a charcoal grey suit that suggested his father's influence, though his slightly disheveled hair betrayed his discomfort with the outfit. "Dr. Donovan," Camille called out, extending a paper cup. "I took the liberty of bringing coffee. Black, no sugar. I noticed that's how you took it yesterday." He accepted the cup, surprised by the gesture. "You're observant. It's my job to be." She settled beside him at the railing, maintaining a professional distance. "You mentioned conditions." Jace took a sip of the coffee. It was exactly how he liked it. "Yes. First, we need to establish ground rules. If we're going to convince people this is real, we need to know each other. Really know each other. I've already compiled dossiers." Camille reached for her briefcase, but Jace held up a hand. "Not files, not data, real things." He turned to face her fully. "What's your favorite book? Do you sleep on the left or right side of the bed? What makes you cry? What makes you laugh? These are things married people know about each other." Camille's carefully maintained composure flickered for just a moment. "I see your point. What do you suggest?" 2 weeks. Jace stood straighter, gaining confidence. "Before we sign anything, before we make any announcements, we spend 2 weeks getting to know each other, properly." 2 weeks? Camille's eyebrows rose. "The investors' meeting is in 8 days. Then we better start now." He checked his watch. "I have a research dive scheduled for this afternoon. Come with me." "To a dive? I don't think—" "First condition, Miss Lawrence. Take it or leave it." Their eyes met in a silent battle of wills. Finally, Camille nodded. "Fine, but I have conditions too. First, we need a believable meeting story, something that explains why two people from such different worlds would connect." "Already handled," came a voice behind them. They turned to find Ava approaching, press badge swinging from her neck. "Sorry I'm late. Traffic was hell." "Miss Carter," Jace greeted, confused. "What are you doing here?" "Creating your love story," Ava grinned, pulling out her notebook. "As far as the world is concerned, you two met through my article on marine conservation funding. Love at first interview. The hard-hitting businesswoman meets the passionate scientist. It's perfect. And legitimate," Camille added. "Your investigation is real. The article will be real. The best covers are based in truth." Jace studied both women. "You've really thought this through." "Of course we have." Camille pulled out her own notebook. "Now about living arrangements. Second condition," Jace interrupted. "We live together, properly together, no separate apartments, no maintaining our own spaces. If we're doing this, we do it convincingly." Camille's pen paused mid-note. "That's not what I expected from you." "Because you expected the shy scientist who lives in his lab." There was a challenge in his voice. "Maybe you need to know me better too." The morning progressed with negotiations that felt more like a delicate dance. Coffee grew cold as they worked through details. Holidays, family obligations, public appearances. But it was the smaller things that kept catching them off guard. "You're allergic to strawberries," Camille noted, watching Jace decline a vendor's offering as they walked. "Deathly. And you?" "Penicillin. And cats, unfortunately. Good thing I'm a marine biologist, not a veterinarian." These little exchanges, scattered between the business talk, began painting a picture neither had expected. Camille learned that Jace hummed unconsciously when concentrating. Jace discovered that Camille had a habit of tucking her hair behind her right ear when thinking deeply. By noon, they'd relocated to a small cafe, papers spread across the table. Ava had left to work on the article, leaving them to navigate their new reality. "About the ring," Camille started. "I have my grandmother's," Jace said quietly. If that's okay. It would make things more convincing with my family." Something in his tone made Camille look up from her notes. There was a vulnerability there she hadn't expected. "That would be perfect," she said softly. The afternoon found them at the aquarium. Camille perched on a stool in Jace's lab as he prepared for his dive. She'd changed into borrowed aquarium gear, a concession that had physically pained her, but was necessary for the afternoon's activities. "You don't actually have to get in the water," Jace assured her, checking his equipment. "You can watch from the observation deck." "No," Camille stood, squaring her shoulders. "If we're doing this, we do it properly. I need to understand your world, just as you'll need to understand mine." Miranda, entering with the final dive checks, nearly dropped her clipboard. "Wait, she's going in." "Jace, are you sure?" "She's sure," Jace corrected, and something in his expression made Miranda pause. The next hour transformed everything. Suspended in the massive tank, watching Jace work was like seeing a different person emerge. Gone was the slightly awkward scientist from the garden. Here, among the swirling fish and gentle giants of the deep, he moved with confident grace. His hands spoke a language of care as he checked Myrtle's shell, documented coral growth, and managed the complex ecosystem around him. Through the diving mask, Camille saw a passion that all her business acumen couldn't quantify. When Myrtle swam close enough to bump playfully against Jace's shoulder, his eyes crinkled with a joy that no contract could capture. Back on dry land, hair still damp and borrowed clothes clinging uncomfortably, Camille made notes in her ever-present notebook. But for the first time, the words weren't about business strategies or investor presentations. "You're good with them," she said as Jace packed up his gear. "The animals, they trust you." "Trust is earned," he replied, not looking up. "It takes time, patience, and consistency. You can't rush it or fake it." The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. That evening, as they parted ways outside the aquarium, the setting sun painted Boston Harbor in shades of gold and promise. They had 12 days left before their engagement would be announced. 12 days to learn a lifetime of details about each other. 12 days to build a foundation of trust that would have to look like love. "Tomorrow," Camille said, checking her calendar. "Board meeting at St. Clair's, 9 a.m. Your world this time?" "Fair is fair." She hesitated, then added, "Wear comfortable shoes. The kids, they can be energetic." As they turned to their separate cars, both felt the weight of what they were undertaking. But something had shifted during those hours underwater. A respect had formed, tentative and unexpected, like the first coral polyp taking hold on a new reef. Neither spoke of the moment when 60 feet underwater, surrounded by the ethereal blue of the tank, their eyes had met through their diving masks, and for a split second, the pretense had felt less like a performance and more like a possibility. That was a dangerous thought, one best left in the depths where it belonged. After all, this was business. Just business, wasn't it? St. Clair's Home for Children stood in stark contrast to the modern building surrounding it, a Victorian mansion with faded red brick and sprawling maple trees that had witnessed decades of children's laughter. Jace arrived early, adjusting his navy blazer as he climbed the worn stone steps. He'd followed Camille's advice about comfortable shoes, opting for leather loafers instead of dress shoes. The sound of children's voices filtered through the heavy wooden door, along with the scent of fresh-baked cookies. Before he could knock, the door swung open to reveal a small girl, no more than 7, with bright eyes and untamed curls. "Are you Miss Camille's prince?" she asked without preamble. Jace blinked, caught off guard. Lucy?" A warm voice called from inside. "What did we say about opening the door without permission?" An elderly woman appeared. Her silver hair swept into a neat bun. Her eyes crinkled with knowing wisdom as she surveyed Jace. "You must be Dr. Donovan. I'm Sister Margaret. Camille warned us you'd be joining the board meeting today." Lucy tugged at Sister Margaret's sleeve. "He didn't answer my question." "Inside, little one. Miss Camille will be here soon." Sister Margaret ushered the child inside, then turned back to Jace. "Come in, Doctor. You're about to see a very different side of your fiancé." The way she hesitated on the word made Jace wonder just how much Sister Margaret knew about their arrangement. But before he could dwell on it, a familiar clicking of heels announced Camille's arrival. She looked different here, still professionally dressed in a cream silk blouse and tailored pants, but somehow softer around the edges. The children swarmed her immediately, Lucy leading the charge. "Miss Camille, your prince is here." A faint blush colored Camille's cheeks as she met Jace's eyes over the children's heads. "Dr. Donovan isn't... We're not... Did you bring us ocean pictures?" A boy interrupted, peering around Camille at Jace. "Tyler's obsessed with marine biology," Camille explained, her composure returning. "I might have mentioned your profession." Jace reached into his messenger bag, pulling out a folder of underwater photographs he'd brought on impulse. "Actually, I did bring some." The next 15 minutes were a blur of excited children, questions about sea creatures, and Camille's surprisingly gentle management of the chaos. She knew each child's name, their interests, their fears. When a small boy in the back started to look overwhelmed by the noise, she smoothly directed everyone to the dining room for cookies, creating a quiet moment for him to recover. "The board meeting starts in 10 minutes, she told Jace, leading him toward the study. "I hope you don't mind the welcome committee." "They're amazing," he said honestly, "especially Lucy. She's just like I was at that age," Camille finished softly. "Too many questions, too much energy, too desperate to believe in fairy tales." The study was a warm space lined with books and children's artwork. Board members began filing in, a mix of local business leaders and long-time supporters. Jace recognized Robert Sterling among them, his calculating gaze taking in their proximity to each other. Camille transformed again, her business persona sliding into place as she presented the latest financial reports. But Jace noticed something new now, the way her voice softened when discussing specific children's needs, the passionate intensity when outlining educational programs. "And now," she said, reaching the crucial part of her presentation, "I'd like to introduce Dr. Jace Donovan, who has agreed to partner with St. Clair's on an exciting new educational initiative." Jace stood, surprised but quick to catch on. This hadn't been part of their planning, but he understood the opportunity she was creating. "Yes, we're developing a marine science program," he improvised, drawing on years of grant presentations. "Connecting children with ocean conservation creates not just environmental awareness, but also opportunities for STEM education and personal growth." Sterling's interest visibly piqued. The other board members leaned forward, and Jace found himself outlining a program that was forming in his mind as he spoke: field trips to the aquarium, hands-on learning experiences, partnerships with local universities. After the meeting, as board members filed out with cautiously optimistic expressions, Sterling lingered. "Quite a surprise, Dr. Donovan," he said, glancing between them. "I wasn't aware you and Miss Lawrence were acquainted." "Life has a way of bringing the right people together at the right time," Camille replied smoothly, her hand finding Jace's with practiced ease. Her fingers were cool but steady against his palm. Once Sterling left, Camille's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Thank you for playing along. The educational program was brilliant." "I wasn't playing," Jace surprised himself by saying. "I mean, we could actually do it." "The aquarium has been wanting to expand its community outreach." Before Camille could respond, a small voice piped up from the doorway. "Miss Camille, can we show Dr. Jace the garden?" Lucy stood there with Tyler and 3 other children, all bouncing with barely contained excitement. Camille checked her watch, then looked at Jace questioningly. "I have time," he said. The garden behind St. Clair's was a magical space where nature had been allowed to run slightly wild. Raised vegetable beds sat alongside flowering bushes, and a massive oak tree supported an old tire swing. The children led them on a grand tour, proudly showing off the tomatoes they'd grown and the butterfly bush they'd planted. "And this," Lucy announced, pulling them toward a quiet corner, "is where Miss Camille used to hide with her books when she was little like us." Jace looked at Camille, seeing a flash of the little girl she must have been. She touched the old oak tree with familiar affection. "It was my favorite spot," she admitted. "You could see everyone in the garden, but they couldn't see you." "Perfect for a future businesswoman," Jace teased gently. "Can always observing the competition." "Perfect for a lonely child," she corrected quietly, then seemed to catch herself. "We should go. I have another meeting, and you have that lab report to finish." But as they walked toward their cars, Lucy came running after them one last time. "Dr. Jace, you forgot your ocean pictures." "Keep them." He knelt to her level. Maybe next time I'll bring new ones. The child's face lit up. You promise? Pinky promise. Jace solemnly linked his pinky with hers, aware of Camille watching them with an unreadable expression. That evening, alone in his apartment, Jace found himself researching educational marine science programs with an enthusiasm that had nothing to do with their arrangement. His phone buzzed with a text from Camille. Lucy asked if you're actually a merman in disguise. Apparently, only magical sea creatures could take such beautiful pictures. Thank you for today. He smiled, typing back, tell her mer people never reveal their secrets, and thank you for showing me your world. In her own home, Camille added a new page to her notebook, but instead of pros and cons or business strategies, she found herself sketching ideas for the education program. In the margin, almost without realizing it, she'd drawn a small oak tree. They were still playing roles, still building their cover story. But somewhere between the morning's board meeting and the evening's quiet reflections, the lines between performance and reality had begun to blur, like watercolors bleeding into each other to create something entirely new. Neither of them was ready to admit it yet, but their carefully constructed plan was developing complications that no contract could have anticipated. The question was, would these complications strengthen their arrangement or tear it apart completely? The Boston Museum of Science's annual Ocean Conservation Gala was exactly the kind of event Jace usually avoided. But tonight, adjusting his bow tie in the mirror of his newly shared apartment with Camille, he had no choice. Their first major public appearance as a couple needed to be perfect. Camille's voice came from behind him. She appeared in the mirror's reflection, already stunning in a deep blue evening gown that reminded him of the depths where his beloved coral reefs grew. Her fingers were deft as she fixed his tie, and he caught the familiar scent of her good girl perfume. The Morrison Foundation board will be there, she reminded him, though they both knew he hadn't forgotten. Anne Sterling confirmed his attendance. Tonight needs to sell our story. I know. Jace met her eyes in the mirror. We've practiced enough. Indeed, the past week had been an intense crash course in becoming a couple. They'd memorized each other's histories, practiced casual touches, and crafted a love story that was just believable enough to be true. Moving in together had been a whirlwind of compromises. His marine biology books now shared shelf space with her business texts, his casual wardrobe carefully separated from her designer pieces. Oh, before I forget, Jace turned, pulling a small box from his jacket pocket. My grandmother's ring, I had it sized. Camille's breath caught as he opened the box. The ring was elegant but understated, a vintage sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. Not the flashy statement piece someone might expect from a power couple, but something with history, with soul. It's beautiful, she whispered, and for a moment, the pretense dropped away. Jace slid the ring onto her finger, both of them acutely aware of how real this moment felt. It suits you, he said softly, then cleared his throat. I mean, it fits the narrative we're creating. Camille flexed her fingers, watching the sapphire catch the light. Your grandmother had excellent taste. She was the only one who supported my love for marine biology, Jace found himself saying. She used to say that passion wasn't measured by its profitability. Something flickered in Camille's eyes, but before she could respond, her phone buzzed. The car's here. The gala was a glittering affair. Boston's elite gathered under the museum's massive glass dome. Jace felt Camille's hand slip into his as they ascended the steps, cameras flashing. She'd coached him on this, how to angle for photos, how to project the right mix of professional success and personal contentment. Dr. Donovan! Miranda's voice cut through the crowd. She approached with a distinguished-looking man in tow. The Morrison Foundation's head of research funding would like to meet you. This was it, their first real test. Jace felt Camille's hand squeeze his slightly before she smoothly joined the conversation. Dr. Harrison, she greeted the man with perfect warmth. I believe we met at last year's sustainability conference. Your work on funding distribution models was fascinating. Harrison's eyebrows rose with interest. Miss Lawrence, I didn't expect to find you at a marine conservation event. Actually, Camille's smile held just the right mix of professional and personal. I'm here supporting my fiancé. Jace's research has opened my eyes to the crucial intersection of conservation and community development. What followed was a masterclass in networking. Camille guided the conversation effortlessly, highlighting Jace's research while demonstrating her own understanding of its importance. When she mentioned their joint educational initiative at St. Clair's, Harrison's interest visibly piqued. Community engagement is a key factor in our funding decisions, he noted, studying them both with new appreciation. "Perhaps we should revisit your proposal, Dr. Donovan." As the evening progressed, they worked the room with practiced coordination. Jace found himself actually enjoying it, especially when Camille's business expertise helped him explain his research in terms that resonated with potential donors. During a quiet moment at their table, Camille leaned close, ostensibly sharing an intimate moment, but actually surveying the room. "Sterling's been watching us all evening. I think he's convinced." "Good," Jace replied, but he was distracted by a tendril of her hair that had escaped its elegant updo. Without thinking, he tucked it behind her ear, a gesture he'd learned was her own nervous habit. Camille froze momentarily, surprised by the natural intimacy of the action. "You're getting better at this." She recovered quickly, but her voice held a note of uncertainty. "Miss Lawrence," Sterling's approach saved them from the moment. "And Dr. Donovan, I must say you two make quite the impressive couple." "Thank you, Robert," Camille replied easily. "Actually, we were hoping to discuss the St. Clair's renovation proposal with you. Jace has some fascinating ideas about incorporating environmental education into the facility upgrades." They launched into business discussion, but Jace found his attention drawn to the way Camille's hand remained in his, her grandmother's ring, catching the light with every gesture. It felt right there, like it had been waiting for her finger all along. The evening's true test came during the dance portion. They'd practiced this too, how to move together convincingly, how to maintain the right amount of professional decorum while suggesting genuine intimacy. As Jace led Camille onto the dance floor, he noticed something different in her posture. The rigid control she usually maintained had softened slightly, perhaps due to the champagne or the evening's success. "You're actually a good dancer," she murmured as they moved to the music. "I wouldn't have expected that from a marine biologist." "My mother's insistence," he explained. "She said social graces were as important as academic achievements." "Smart woman. She would have liked you," Jace said without thinking, then realized his mistake. This wasn't real. They weren't really sharing family histories and future plans, but Camille didn't pull away. Instead, she moved slightly closer, her cheek almost touching his. "Tell me about her." For the next dance, Jace found himself sharing memories he rarely discussed. His mother's garden, her love of classical music, her battle with cancer that ended too soon. Camille listened without the practiced attention she gave investors, her fingers tightening on his when he spoke of his last Christmas with her. "My parents died in a car accident when I was 4, Camille offered quietly. "That's how I ended up at St. Clair's. I don't remember them much, just feelings. The smell of my mother's vanilla lotion, my father's laugh." They were still dancing, but the performance had fallen away. This wasn't for Sterling's benefit or the Morrison Foundation's approval. This was something else, something neither of them had anticipated. The spell broke when Ava appeared, camera in hand. "Sorry to interrupt, lovebirds, but I need a quote for the article. Something about how you two met." Reality crashed back in. They were acting. This was business. The warmth of the dance floor cooled as they recited their carefully crafted story for Ava's recorder. Later that night, in their shared apartment, Camille slipped off her heels while Jace loosened his bow tie. The evening had been a success. Harrison had all but confirmed the grant's approval, and Sterling had scheduled a private meeting to discuss increased funding for St. Clair's. "We did it," Camille said, but her voice lacked its usual triumph. "Yeah," Jace agreed, watching as she moved to remove his grandmother's ring. "I should probably take this off." "Keep it on," he said quickly. We need to get used to wearing it." "For authenticity," Camille nodded, her fingers stilling on the ring. "For authenticity." They moved around each other in a careful dance, preparing for bed in their separate rooms, but as Jace lay awake, staring at his ceiling, he couldn't shake the memory of how right she'd felt in his arms during that dance, or how natural it had been to share his mother's memory with her. In her own room, Camille found herself opening her notebook, but instead of adding to her meticulous plans, she just traced her finger over the sapphire ring, wondering when the line between performance and reality had begun to blur and whether she should be more worried about it. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen blinds as Camille prepared her usual black coffee. The domestic routine they'd developed over the past 2 weeks felt surprisingly natural. Jace's morning protein shake in the fridge, his research papers scattered across the dining table, the lingering scent of his Aqua di Gio mixing with her good girl perfume in their shared space. Her phone buzzed with a message from Sterling. "Lunch meeting today. Bring Dr. Donovan. Important discussions about St. Clair's future. Jace, she called out, then caught herself. When had she stopped calling him Dr. Donovan? He emerged from his room, hair damp from the shower, already dressed in a light blue button-down and khakis. Morning. Is that coffee I smell? Sterling wants to meet for lunch. Both of us. She handed him a mug, prepared exactly as he liked it. A splash of cream, no sugar. Another detail she'd unconsciously memorized. I can't. I have a crucial experiment running today. The coral spawning cycle. This is important, she interrupted, then softened her tone. Please, the funding decision for St. Clair's. Jace's expression shifted as he saw the worry behind her professional mask. I'll ask Miranda to monitor the tanks. What time? Noon at Sorrelina. She touched his arm briefly in thanks, a gesture that had become habitual. I'll wear the navy suit. As you wish, he smiled, mimicking their private joke from movie night 2 days ago. They'd watched The Princess Bride because Lucy had asked if Camille's prince knew the story. The memory of that evening, Camille curled up on their couch, laughing genuinely at his marine biology commentary during the eel scene, tugged at something in his chest, something he wasn't ready to examine too closely. Sorrelina was packed with Boston's business elite when they arrived. Sterling had reserved a private booth, and his smile when they approached held a hint of satisfaction that made Camille uneasy. Miss Lawrence, Dr. Donovan. He gestured to the seats across from him. I took the liberty of ordering wine. We're celebrating. Celebrating? Camille asked, feeling Jace's hand rest protectively on her lower back as they sat. The board has approved full funding for St. Clair's renovation, Sterling announced, including Dr. Donovan's marine education program, on one condition. The waiter arrived with an expensive Bordeaux, giving them a moment to process this news. Camille felt Jace's fingers intertwine with hers under the table, no longer just for show, but seeking real connection. What condition? Jace asked, his scientist's skepticism evident. Sterling took a deliberate sip of wine. The board feels that the program's success depends on long-term stability. We're prepared to offer a 10-year funding guarantee, contingent on both of you maintaining active roles in St. Clair's management. The implications hung heavy in the air. 10 years. Their one-year arrangement suddenly felt very small. That's, Camille started. Generous, Jace finished smoothly. I will need to review the terms, of course. Of course, Sterling smiled. Take your time. The wedding's not for several months, after all. Camille nearly choked on her wine. Wedding? Well, you are engaged. Sterling's eyes flickered to the sapphire ring. The board would expect the ceremony before the new fiscal year, for proper documentation purposes. The rest of lunch passed in a blur of polite conversation and internal panic. They maintained their facade perfectly, sharing bites of each other's meals, exchanging knowing looks, playing the happy couple. But underneath, both were drowning in the implications of Sterling's news. Back at the aquarium that afternoon, Jace buried himself in work. The coral spawning experiment provided a welcome distraction from thoughts of legal documents and wedding vows. But even 60 feet underwater in the research tank, he couldn't escape the memory of Camille's face when Sterling mentioned the wedding. You're distracted, Miranda observed as they reviewed the data. The gala went well. The Morrison Foundation is practically throwing money at your research now. What's wrong? Jace stared at the numbers swimming before his eyes. Have you ever started something thinking you knew exactly what it was, only to realize you're completely out of your depth? We're marine biologists, Miranda smiled. Being out of our depth is literally our job. Her expression softened. But we're not talking about work, are we? Before he could respond, his phone lit up with a message from his father. Dinner tonight. Non-negotiable. Bring your fiancé. Your mother's ring deserves a proper family introduction. Meanwhile, across town, Camille sat in her office, unable to focus on the contracts before her. The notebook that usually brought her comfort lay open to a blank page. How did you plan for feelings you never meant to develop? A knock at her door revealed Ava, bearing emergency coffee and concern. You look like you need this, and possibly something stronger. Sterling wants a wedding, Camille said quietly, accepting the coffee. A real one. Legal documents, ceremony, everything. And that's a problem, because, Ava raised an eyebrow, the plan was always to make it look real. But it wasn't supposed to feel real. The words escaped before Camille could stop them. Ava's expression softened. Oh, honey. I can't. Camille stood, pacing her office. I can't risk St. Clair's future on feelings that might not be real. that probably aren't real. He's good at this, at making it seem genuine. Is he? Ava challenged. Or is he just as lost as you are? Camille's phone buzzed. Jace's message about his father's dinner invitation. Another test, another performance, except it didn't feel like a performance anymore, and that terrified her more than any business negotiation ever had. That evening, as they prepared for dinner, the comfortable domestic rhythm they'd developed felt different, charged with unspoken questions. My father can be intense, Jace warned as they pulled up to the expensive restaurant. We don't have to do this. Camille adjusted his tie, a habit she'd developed without realizing it. Yes, we do. This is part of the plan. The plan, he repeated softly. Right, but when Richard Donovan raised his glass to toast their engagement, when he spoke of family traditions and legacy, when he looked at Camille with approval and told Jace he'd finally made a wise choice, it didn't feel like a plan anymore. Later that night, in their shared apartment, the weight of everything unsaid hung between them like storm clouds over a calm sea. We should talk about Sterling's condition. Camille finally broke the silence. Gyas tomorrow, Jace said, not meeting her eyes. I need to check on the spawning data. He retreated to his room, leaving Camille alone with her notebook and her thoughts. On the page, she'd written just one line. When did the biggest risk become not the plan failing, but the plan working too well? In his room, Jace held his phone, staring at an email from the Morrison Foundation. His research funding was approved, contingent on his continued involvement with St. Clair's educational program. Everything they'd wanted was falling into place. So why did success feel so dangerous? Because somewhere between the practice touches and memorized details, between shared coffee and movie nights, between his grandmother's ring and her unconscious habit of fixing his tie, somewhere in all of that, the lines had blurred beyond recognition. They were swimming in dangerous waters now, and neither of them had packed a life jacket. The crisis hit on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Camille was reviewing wedding venue options, a task that felt increasingly surreal, when her phone exploded with notifications. Ava's name flashed on the screen. Turn on the news. Now. The headline made her blood run cold. St. Clair's home under investigation. Financial irregularities alleged. Below it, in smaller text, questions raised about recent engagement of key players. Her hands shaking, Camille clicked the link. The article was a masterpiece of insinuation, suggesting that her sudden engagement to Jace coincided too perfectly with both St. Clair's funding needs and his research grants. Someone had been digging and digging deep. Before she could process the implications, Sterling was calling. Emergency board meeting. 1 hour. Bring Dr. Donovan. Camille's fingers flew over her phone, texting Jace, Code red, need you at St. Clair's now. At the aquarium, Jace was already dealing with his own crisis. The Morrison Foundation had sent an email expressing concerns about recent developments and requesting an immediate review of his grant status. Miranda watched with worry as he paced the lab. They can't just withdraw funding based on rumors, she insisted. Watch them, Jace muttered, grabbing his jacket. I have to go, the spawning data. I've got it, Miranda interrupted. So go take care of your fiancé. The word hit differently now, weighted with complications neither of them had anticipated. Jace paused at the door. Miranda, thank you. The scene at St. Clair's was chaos contained only by the necessity of protecting the children. Sister Margaret had shepherded them into the garden for an impromptu nature lesson, her calm exterior masking deep concern. Jace found Camille in the study, surrounded by board members in various states of panic. She stood at the head of the table, every inch the competent businesswoman, but he caught the slight tremor in her hand as she gestured to financial charts. These allegations are completely unfounded, she was saying as he entered. Every transaction is documented, every decision transparent. The timing looks suspicious, one board member argued. The sudden engagement, the matching grants. Dr. Donovan, Sterling's voice cut through the debate. Perhaps you'd like to address these concerns. Jace moved to stand beside Camille, close enough to feel her tension. Our relationship and our professional commitments are separate matters. The children of St. Clair's shouldn't suffer because someone wants to create scandal from success. Pretty words, another board member scoffed. But the Morrison Foundation is already wavering. One hint of impropriety and... Enough, the voice came from the doorway. Sister Margaret stood there, steel in her gentle frame. While you all debate appearances, there are 23 children wondering if they're going to lose their home. Again, the room fell silent. Camille's hand found Jace's, squeezing hard enough to hurt. This wasn't for show. This was pure need for support. "Sister Margaret is right," Jace said quietly. "We're losing sight of what matters here." Camille straightened, drawing strength from his presence. "Give us 48 hours. We'll prove every allegation false and present a plan to protect St. Clair's reputation going forward." The board dispersed with reluctant agreement, leaving them alone in the study. The moment the door closed, Camille's professional facade crumbled. "I should have seen this coming," she whispered, sinking into a chair. "Should have planned for every possibility." Jace knelt beside her, still holding her hand. "You can't plan for everything. This was supposed to be simple," she laughed bitterly. "A business arrangement. Clean, uncomplicated. When has anything about us been uncomplicated?" The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Before either could address it, Ava burst in, laptop in hand. "I found the source," she announced. "You're not going to like it." The name on the screen made Jace's stomach turn. William Blackwell, the son of the family his father had been so keen on connecting him with before the engagement. "Revenge journalism," Ava explained. "He's been digging since the gala. The article's full of half-truths and implications. But the damage is done," Camille finished. The next 24 hours became a blur of damage control. Camille and Jace worked in perfect synchronization, her business acumen combining with his scientific precision to track down every accusation and counter it with facts. They moved around each other in their apartment like dancers who'd always known the steps, passing coffee and sharing silent support. Late that night, surrounded by papers and empty takeout containers, Camille found herself watching Jace as he explained coral restoration techniques to Lucy over video chat. The little girl had been upset by news vans outside St. Clair's, and somehow Jace had known exactly how to calm her, with stories of sea creatures rebuilding their homes after storms. "Promise you won't let them close our home?" Lucy asked, her voice small through the speaker. "Our pinky promise," Jace replied solemnly, and Camille's heart twisted. After the call, silence settled over them like a heavy blanket. Camille stared at her notebook, its pages filled with strategies and contingencies, but not the words she really needed to say. "We could end it," she said finally, not looking at him. "Announce an amicable split. Blame the pressure. It might solve—" "No." Jace's response was immediate and fierce. "A running away won't help St. Clair's, or the research, or what?" He moved to sit beside her on the couch, close enough that she could smell his familiar cologne mixing with the coffee on his breath. "You know what, Jace," she started, but he pressed on. "When you pulled me into that first board meeting, I thought I was just playing a part. When I brought those ocean photos for the kids, I told myself it was for show. Every touch, every shared coffee, every late-night conversation, I kept saying it was all for the plan. Wasn't it?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Was it?" He reached for her hand, thumb brushing over his grandmother's ring. "Because I'm starting to think the plan was just an excuse, a safe way to fall in." A knock at the door cut him off. Ava stood there, looking apologetic but urgent. "They're running a follow-up story tomorrow. We need to get ahead of it." Reality crashed back in. They spent the next hours crafting statements and strategies, their almost conversation buried under the weight of necessity. But something had shifted, like the first tremors before an earthquake. As dawn broke over Boston, Camille found herself on their small balcony, watching the city wake up. Jace joined her, offering coffee made exactly how she liked it. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "we face it together. Not for the plan, not for the grants or the funding, just together." She took the coffee, their fingers brushing. "Together," she echoed, and it felt like a different kind of promise altogether. Behind them, their phones buzzed with new crisis alerts, but for just that moment, they let themselves exist in the space between pretense and truth, between what they'd planned and what they'd found instead. The storm wasn't over. It was just beginning. But maybe, just maybe, they'd already found their life jacket in each other. The press conference was Camille's idea, a calculated risk to take control of the narrative. They stood together outside St. Clair's, the morning sun casting long shadows across the historic building's facade. Camille wore her armor, a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, not a hair out of place. Jace stood beside her in his navy blazer, their united front carefully choreographed yet somehow entirely natural. "St. Clair's has always been transparent in its operations," Camille addressed the gathered reporters, her voice steady despite the cameras flashing. "We welcome any investigation into our finances and practices. What we won't tolerate is the exploitation of children's stability for the sake of sensationalized journalism." Jace watched her with a mixture of pride and concern. She was magnificent in crisis, every word precise, every gesture calculated for maximum impact, but he could see the toll it was taking. The slight darkness under her concealer, the way her fingers kept brushing his grandmother's ring like a talisman. "Dr. Donovan," a reporter called out, "how do you respond to allegations that your engagement was timed to secure research funding?" Before Camille could step in, Jace took the microphone. "I fell in love with Camille Lawrence long before I understood the full scope of her work at St. Clair's." The words came easily, perhaps because they weren't entirely a lie anymore. Anyone questioning the timing should look at their own cynicism, not our commitment. Their eyes met briefly, and something electric passed between them. This wasn't in their script. The questions continued, but a commotion at the entrance drew everyone's attention. Lucy had slipped away from Sister Margaret, running straight for Camille and Jace. "You promised," she shouted, tears streaming down her face. "You promised you wouldn't let them take our home." Without hesitation, Jace scooped her up while Camille stepped in front of them, shielding Lucy from the cameras. The three of them created a tableau that no planned publicity could have manufactured. A family protecting their own. "Cut the cameras," Ava's voice rang out. "Now, or I'll personally ensure none of you get access to my next big story." Inside St. Clair's, Lucy clung to them both, her small hands fisted in Jace's shirt, while Camille stroked her hair. "I saw the mean people on TV," she hiccuped. "They said you were pretending." The word hit them both like a physical blow. Camille met Jace's eyes over Lucy's head, seeing her own pain reflected there. "Sometimes," Jace said carefully, "grown-ups are complicated. But some things are very simple." He gently turned Lucy to face him. "Like how much we care about you and St. Clair's. That's not pretend at all." Sister Margaret appeared, offering to take Lucy for her afternoon lessons. As the child reluctantly let go, she looked back at them. "Are you going to leave like my other family did?" The question shattered something in Camille. The moment Lucy was out of sight, she practically ran to the old oak tree in the garden, her professional composure crumbling. Jace found her there, in her childhood hiding spot, tears finally breaking through her careful mask. Without a word, he sat beside her, close enough for their shoulders to touch. "We're hurting them," she whispered. "All our careful plans, and we're hurting the very people we meant to protect." "No," Jace's voice was firm. "Blackwell and his vendetta are hurting them. The broken system that values appearance over substance is hurting them. We're trying to fix it. By lying," she turned to face him, makeup smeared but eyes fierce. "By pretending to be in love. Are we?" The question hung between them, heavy with possibility. Pretending. Before she could answer, both their phones buzzed. The Morrison Foundation was calling an emergency review. Their presence was required. Immediately, the drive to the Foundation's offices was silent, charged with unspoken words. Camille stared out the window, one hand absently touching the sapphire ring. Jace gripped the steering wheel, remembering Lucy's tears, Camille's breakdown. The way holding them both had felt completely right. The Foundation's boardroom was intimidating by design. All dark wood and leather chairs, old money and older judgments. "Doctor." Harrison sat at the head of the table, his earlier warmth replaced by corporate concern. "The allegations are troubling," he began without preamble. "Not just the financial implications, but the question of authenticity. Our funding decisions were based on the stability your partnership represented." "Our partnership is real," Jace stated, surprising himself with his vehemence. "Real enough to risk everything on," Harrison challenged. "Your research, Miss Lawrence's orphanage, both your reputations." "Yes." The answer came from Camille, soft but certain. "Because somewhere between the plan and this moment, it became real. Maybe it always was, and we were too scared to admit it." The room fell silent. Jace stared at her, heart pounding. This wasn't part of their strategy. This was raw truth, dangerous and beautiful. "Prove it," Harrison said simply. "Not with paperwork or public statements. Prove that this isn't an elaborate scheme to secure funding." "How?" Jace asked. But his hand had already found Camille's under the table. "Move up the wedding. Next week, let us see if you're willing to commit legally and personally to this partnership you claim is real." The challenge hung in the air like storm clouds. A week. No time to plan, no time to pretend, No time to hide behind carefully constructed facades. In the elevator afterward, they stood in loaded silence. The numbers ticked down, each one bringing them closer to a decision point. "We don't have to do this," Jace finally said. "We can find another way." Camille turned to him, really looked at him, at the man who brought ocean photos to orphans, who knew how she took her coffee, who held her while she cried under an oak tree, at the person who had somehow become essential to her world. "What if—" she started, then gathered her courage. "What if I want to?" The elevator doors opened to the lobby, but neither moved. They stood suspended between floors, between pretense and truth, between fear and something that felt remarkably like hope. "Then we do it," Jace said softly. "Not for the Foundation, not for St. Clair's, not even for Lucy, for us." Camille's phone buzzed. Ava, probably with more crisis updates. Jace's lit up with a message from Miranda about the coral spawning data. The real world was demanding their attention, but for that moment in the elevator, they let themselves acknowledge what had been building all along. The greatest risk wasn't in the plan failing. It was in the plan working so well that it stopped being a plan at all. "They for us?" Camille echoed, and when Jace leaned down to kiss her, there were no cameras watching, no investors to convince, no roles to play. Just two people who had planned for everything except falling in love. A week wasn't much time to plan a wedding, but Camille Lawrence had built her career on making the impossible happen. Their apartment had transformed into a command center. Seating charts covered the dining table, flower samples lined the kitchen counter, and Ava had practically moved in, coordinating press coverage while helping with arrangements. The Boston Harbor Hotel confirmed the waterfront ceremony. Camille checked another item off her ever-present notebook. "Sister Margaret is handling the children's formal wear, and the Morrison Foundation's board all RSVP'd yes." "Breathe," Jace reminded her, sliding a fresh cup of coffee across the counter. He'd loosened his tie after a long day at the aquarium, where Miranda was helping him prepare his research for temporary handover. "I am breathing," Camille insisted, but she took a moment to inhale the coffee's aroma. "Did your father's reply come?" Jace's expression tightened. "He's coming, with expectations." Richard Donovan had been surprisingly supportive since the press conference, perhaps seeing the business advantages of his son marrying a successful entrepreneur. But his approval came weighted with conditions, expectations about their future, about children, about Jace's career path. "We don't have to live up to anyone's expectations but our own," Camille said softly, reaching for his hand. These casual touches had become natural now, no longer performed for an audience. "I know." He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "How's Lucy doing with her flower girl duties?" Camille smiled, remembering the little girl's excitement during her dress fitting. "She's taking her role very seriously." She asked if she could practice throwing rose petals in the garden. "Speaking of practice," Ava interrupted, emerging from her temporary office in the guest room, "we need to go over your vows. The press will be analyzing every word." Right, the press. In the quiet moments of genuine connection, it was easy to forget that their wedding was still partly a performance. The thought sobered them both. "Actually," Jace straightened, "I'd like to write my own." Without review, Ava started to protest, but something in his expression made her pause. "Your call, but keep it coordinated with Camille's." "No," Camille surprised herself by saying, I want to hear them for the first time at the ceremony. Real reactions, no rehearsal." The word real hung between them, heavy with meaning. How much of their relationship had started as performance and evolved into truth? Where did the act end and genuine feeling begin? Their quiet moment was interrupted by Camille's phone, Sterling, with updates about St. Clair's investigation. The financial audit had cleared them of wrongdoing, but the public relations damage needed careful handling. "The wedding will help," he assured them. "Nothing says legitimate like a proper ceremony. The guest list is perfect. Business leaders, academics, the right mix of power and respectability." After the call, Camille found herself at the window, watching the city lights flicker on. Jace's reflection appeared behind her, and she leaned back against him instinctively. "Having second thoughts?" he asked quietly. "About the wedding?" "No." She turned to face him. "About everything that comes after." "Maybe." "What do you mean?" "This started as a business arrangement. Clean, defined, with clear objectives." She gestured to her notebook, full of wedding plans and PR strategies. "But now it's messy," he finished. "Complicated. Real. Real is scary," she admitted. "Real means we can fail. Real means we can get hurt. Jace took her hands, his thumbs brushing over his grandmother's ring. Real also means we can succeed. Really succeed, not just check boxes on a plan. Before she could respond, the doorbell rang. Miranda stood there, looking apologetic but urgent. Jace, the coral spawning data. There's something you need to see. The next morning found them at the aquarium before dawn. Jace moved through the lab with focused energy, while Camille watched from his office, trying not to disturb his concentration. The timing is perfect, he explained, showing her complex charts. The coral recovery rates align exactly with our predicted models. This could revolutionize reef restoration. His excitement was contagious, his passion for the work evident in every gesture. Camille found herself smiling, remembering why she'd first been drawn to him, not just his usefulness to her plan, but his genuine dedication to something bigger than himself. "What?" he asked, catching her expression. "I just realized. I'm not worried about the Morrison Foundation anymore, or Sterling, or the press, or any of it, because this, your work, these results, this is what matters. This is real." Jace set down his papers, moving to stand before her. "You know what else is real? The way you fight for those kids at St. Clair's, the way you remember how everyone takes their coffee, the way you touch that ring when you're nervous." She glanced down. She'd been doing exactly that without realizing it. When did this stop being an act? I don't think it ever was. Not completely. He lifted her chin gently. I think we just used the plan as an excuse to let ourselves fall in love. The word they'd been dancing around finally hung in the open. Love, not convenience, not arrangement, not mutual benefit. Love. A knock at the door revealed Lucy, escorted by Sister Margaret for a pre-wedding visit to the aquarium. The little girl's face lit up at seeing them together. "Are you practicing being married?" she asked innocently. Camille and Jace exchanged looks, years of meaning passing between them in a moment. "No, sweetheart," Camille answered. "We're just being us." The rest of the day passed in a whirlwind of final preparations, their apartment filled with delivery people, wedding coordinators and well-wishers. Ava ran interference with the press while they handled last-minute details. That evening, following tradition, they prepared to spend their last night apart before the ceremony. Camille would stay with Ava, Jace at their apartment. As she packed an overnight bag, Camille found herself lingering over shared spaces, his marine biology books mixed with her business texts, their coffee mugs side by side in the kitchen, the blanket they shared during movie nights draped over the couch. "It's just one night," Jace teased, but his voice held a note of uncertainty. "I know." She turned to him. "Jace, tomorrow, when we say our vows, they'll be real," he promised. "Every word." She nodded, fighting unexpected tears. "Good, because I don't think I can pretend anymore." "Then don't." He pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her perfume. "No more pretending, no more performance. Just us, building something real." As she left with Ava, Camille paused at the door. "Tomorrow, he confirmed, and every day after." In separate beds that night, both found themselves unable to sleep. Camille stared at his grandmother's ring, remembering every moment that had led them here. Jace worked on his vows, trying to find words for feelings that had snuck up on him like the tide, slowly, inevitably, completely. Tomorrow, they would stand before their world and make promises. But the most important promises had already been made, in quiet moments and casual touches, in shared coffee and silent support, in all the ways they'd chosen each other when no one was watching. The plan had worked perfectly, just not in the way they'd expected. Dawn broke over Boston Harbor in shades of rose and gold, the water reflecting the promise of a perfect autumn day. In her suite at the Boston Harbor Hotel, Camille stood at the window, watching early morning boats cross the harbor. Her wedding dress, an elegant sheath of ivory silk with subtle beading that caught the light like water droplets, hung nearby. "Stop overthinking," Ava commanded, entering with coffee and a knowing smile. "Everything's perfect. The press is contained, Sterling's ecstatic, and the Morrison Foundation representatives are already praising the commitment to stability you're showing." "I'm not thinking about any of that," Camille realized, surprised to find it true. Her notebook lay unopened on the desk, wedding logistics and PR strategies forgotten. "No." Ava started arranging Camille's hair into elegant curls. "Or what are you thinking about? The way Jace looks when he talks about his coral reefs, how he always knows when I need coffee without asking, the sound of his voice reading ocean stories to Lucy." Camille touched his grandmother's ring. which would soon be joined by a wedding band. All the little moments when I forgot we were pretending. Oh, honey. Ava paused in her styling. So I don't think either of you was ever really pretending. Across the hotel, in his own preparation suite, Jay stood before a mirror, attempting to tame his perpetually disheveled hair. Miranda sat nearby, reviewing last-minute data from the coral spawning experiment. The results are extraordinary, she reported. The Foundation's going to double the funding when they see these numbers. Good, Jay said absently, his hand touching his jacket pocket where his handwritten vows waited. Words that had nothing to do with funding or appearances or carefully crafted images. A knock at the door revealed his father, impeccable in a designer suit. Son, Richard Donovan nodded approval. You've done well. The Lawrence connection will open doors we never... Dad, Jace interrupted quietly. I'm not marrying a connection. I'm marrying Camille. Something in his tone made Richard pause, really looking at his son for perhaps the first time. You actually love her? Yes. The simplicity of the truth felt liberating. And my work at the aquarium? That's not a phase or a rebellion. It's who I am, who we are. To his surprise, his father smiled, a real smile, not his usual corporate mask. Your mother would be proud. She always said you had her heart for doing what matters, not what's expected. Before Jace could respond, another knock announced an unexpected visitor. Lucy stood there in her flower girl dress, Sister Margaret hovering protectively behind her. Dr. Jace! Lucy's voice was small. Can I ask you something important? Of course, sweetheart. He knelt to her level, careful not to wrinkle his suit. Are you and Miss Camille going to be happy, really happy, not just pretend happy? The question hit him with the force of a wave. Out of the mouths of babes, indeed. Come here. He pulled her into a gentle hug. What we feel. It's the most real thing in my world. The ceremony space transformed the hotel's waterfront terrace into something magical. White chairs faced the harbor, where boats passed in the distance. A floral arch framed the water view, and rose petals lined the aisle. Lucy had indeed practiced her scattering technique to perfection. The guests represented their merged worlds, academics and business leaders, orphanage staff and marine biologists, all the people who'd been part of their journey. Dr. Harrison sat with the Morrison Foundation board, while Sterling watched with paternal pride. Even William Blackwell had sent an apologetic note with a generous donation to St. Clair's, perhaps realizing that real love made better headlines than scandal. When the music began, Jace took his place under the arch. The morning sun caught the water behind him, creating a backdrop of dancing light. Lucy proceeded down the aisle first, taking her flower-scattering duties with utmost seriousness, each petal placed with careful consideration. Then the music changed, and Camille appeared. Later, guests would comment on her grace, the perfect cut of her dress, the way she seemed to glow. But Jace saw only her eyes, fixed on his with a certainty that made his carefully written vows feel inadequate. She reached him, taking his hands, and the world narrowed to just them. No audience, no performance, no plan. The vows you've prepared, the officiant prompted. Jace took a breath, but the words he'd written weren't the ones that came out. Camille Lawrence, I fell in love with you in 1,000 small moments, in shared coffee and late-night conversations, in the way you fight for what matters and care for those who need you, in how you make color-coded spreadsheets for everything, but can't help dancing to bad pop songs when you think no one's watching. A tear escaped down her cheek, and he brushed it away gently. I love you in board meetings and quiet mornings, in crisis and in calm, in every real moment we've shared and all the ones yet to come. This isn't the beginning of our story. That started the day you walked into my lab with an impossible proposal, but it is the beginning of our truth, and I promise to keep choosing that truth, choosing you, every single day. Camille's hands tightened in his. When she spoke, her voice was steady despite her tears. Jace Donovan, I built my life on plans and strategies, on knowing exactly what would happen next. Then you came along with your passion for the ocean and your heart that's too big to hide, and you made me want something messier, something real. She touched his grandmother's ring, their symbol of both pretense and truth. I fell in love with your dedication to saving coral reefs and your patience with children's endless questions, with the way you see beauty in broken things and possibility in every challenge. You taught me that the best things in life can't be planned. They have to be felt, lived, cherished. I promise to keep living this truth with you, supporting your dreams as you've supported mine, loving you not because it's practical, but because it's inevitable. Like the tide coming in, like the sun rising over the harbor. Some things are simply meant to be. There wasn't a dry eye on the terrace. Lucy beamed from her place of honor, while Sister Margaret dabbed at her tears. Even Richard Donovan looked moved. "The rings?" the officiant asked. The wedding bands were simple platinum, inscribed with a wave pattern. As they exchanged them, the morning sun caught the metal, creating tiny rainbows on their joined hands. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you." But they were already kissing, real and raw and perfect. The audience's applause mixed with the sound of waves against the shore, nature's own celebration. The reception passed in a blur of congratulations and dancing. They moved together, as if they'd been doing it all their lives, their practiced steps now flowing from genuine joy rather than careful choreography. During a quiet moment, they slipped away to the terrace. The autumn sun was setting, painting the harbor in shades of possibility. "So," Camille leaned against the railing, her head on his shoulder, "was this part of your plan, Dr. Donovan?" "None of it," he smiled, pulling her closer. "And all of it, you. I planned for everything except falling in love with you." She turned in his arms. Best failed strategy ever. Their laughter mixed with the evening breeze, carrying across the water like a promise. Inside, their guests waited, Sterling with funding papers, Harrison with research grants, Lucy with more questions about ocean creatures. Their professional lives would continue, challenges and all. But here, in this moment, they were just Camille and Jace, two people who had planned for success and found love instead. Or perhaps they'd found both, in a combination more perfect than either could have strategized. "Ready to go back in?" Jace asked softly. Camille looked at their joined hands, wedding bands catching the last light of day, ready for everything. Together, they turned toward their future, not the one they'd planned, but the one they'd discovered, and it was better than any strategy could have predicted. The end based on Camille and Jace's intense emotional journey. Here's a question: how far would you go for a professional dream? Camille and Jace started out with an agreement of convenience, but fate had other plans. If you were in their shoes, would you have the courage to risk a facade marriage even though you knew you could fall in love for real? Or would you prefer to find another, less emotionally risky solution? Between the reason of business and the emotion of the heart, which path would you choose? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.